Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Solidifying IDDSI Implementation, How Team Training is Your Secret Weapon. My name is Jenny Kinter, and I am an Associate Marketing Manager at General Mills, and will be your host for the webinar today. This webinar is sponsored by General Mills Foodservice, providing the food people love away from home. We are proud to offer the quality product food service professionals rely on for consistent results in their own operations, as well as the beloved brands their customers know and trust. Today's webinar is supported by General Mills Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition. The Bell Institute is the company's internal source for scientific health and nutrition expertise. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to cover off on a few housekeeping reminders. Today's webinar will be recorded with a Q&A session at the end. However, you may submit questions at any time during the webinar by clicking the Q&A icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. After the webinar concludes, you will receive an email with links to the slides and continuing education credit certificates in the coming days. Make sure you check your spam folder. Please note, approval by the Commission on Dietetic Registration for CEUs was not requested for this webinar. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's expert. Margaret Maggie Roche is the founder of Roche Dietitians and a nationally recognized leader in nutrition consulting. Her mission is to educate and empower those who nourish others. She believes that food is medicine, and she uses evidence-based standards to promote health and wellness through nutrition, especially for the older adult. She guides organizations and individuals through the complexities of medical nutrition therapy and the business of serving food in healthcare. Maggie is a registered dietitian with a master's degree in clinical nutrition. She has advanced credentials as a board-certified specialist in gerontological nutrition and is distinguished as a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. For more information on Maggie, please visit rochedietitians.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maggie. With that, let's begin our presentation. I hope you all enjoy.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Let's get started with our learning objectives for today. At the end of this presentation, you as a learner will be able to describe which components of IDDSI are important for everyone to understand. You'll be able to indicate how to engage multiple types of learners and foster independent problem solving in IDDSI training. You'll be able to cite examples where good IDDSI training programs can reduce citations related to textured modified foods. And you will be able to recognize the importance of creating a culture of safety around textured modified foods and thickened liquids. Right out of the box, we're going to engage you all and with a polling question. Let me bring that up right now. I think we're going to use the chat function for this. So my first question is, where are you on IDDSI implementation? Would you please put in the chat, and you can put either A, B, C, D, or E, or you can type it out. But A is you're just learning about IDDSI. B is you're aware of IDDSI, but no plans yet. C is you're starting IDDSI implementation. D is you have already started IDDSI implementation. And E is well into implementation. And you can put that in the chat. And I know Jenny's going to monitor that for us. Okay, we've got one started.
Yeah, and go ahead and put that in the Q&A, folks. We don't have the chat on. No, that's okay. Sorry. Just because the amount of folks. So just go ahead and put it in Q&A, and I will monitor those for you.
Okay. And it's very interesting. I've been asking this question since 2018. And I do see us moving towards the E's. You know, in the beginning, people were just learning about IDDSI, but now the train has left the station. But there's still plenty of folks who have not yet started implementation and are just getting started. So it's interesting to see what kind of results we're going to get today.
Yeah, you're spot on, Maggie. We've got a lot of B's, a lot of E's, probably the most E's, and an occasional A. So B, A, and E. But E is really taking the cake here.
Okay, good. That's great. Okay, I'm going to move forward. I just think it's and even for ourselves, it's kind of good to know where you're at. So, all right. So let's move on. What I want to say before we move on is that IDDSI, which I should say, it's the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, for those who don't know. And it really has been a paradigm shift for us. in this world of textured modified foods and thickened liquids. It was launched in 2017. It was adopted by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics 2019. It really has become our standard of practice. The speech pathologists organization supported as well. It does add, however, a new level of complexity to serving meals with textured modified foods and thickened liquids, not only because of the intricacies of the menu that in recipes and the manuals and all the processes, but we have this other new a significant amount of training that it requires for our food service teams and for our entire organizations. And something that we don't talk about sometimes when it comes to IDDSI is that we have, we're roll our sleeves up kind of folks, people in dining. And if there's a new initiative or something we have to do, we're all good and we can do it. However, if the entire organization is impacted by this, it's going to require a fair amount of interdisciplinary work and ownership. So that's something to consider in your training as well. And it does require ongoing training. It's not a one and done situation. And I'll show you a few examples of that as we move on. All right, so let's look at why IDDSI was established. How did we get here? And it's really mainly because of the confusion. There really was not standardized language, and there were not standardized definitions of how we were defining each one of these layers. And remember, it's more than one diet. It's not like we're just changing, think about diabetes. And when we went from exchange lists to the carbohydrate counting, that was 30 years ago, believe it or not, and people are still trying to get that straight. Here we've got several levels of textured modified foods and drinks that we're trying to change throughout the entire healthcare system globally. So it's a big undertaking, but there's a big need for it as well. All right, just to take a step, pull the lens back a little bit on IDDSI, just so we're all on the same page. It's important to understand that the foundations of IDDSI, it's the framework, which you see here visually. And what we're talking about is that IDDSI offers us the standardized language, not only by what we call the diet, but also how we define each diet level, each IDDSI level. It defines the characteristics, what does pureed food actually look like? And very importantly, why people need a certain level of the IDDSI framework. And of course, what I think is the game changer for us and what really sold me on IDDSI was that these testing methods, because it really allows us to independently decide whether or not a food meets the criteria for that level. And something that you might not be familiar with is that in the IDDSI documents on IDDSI.org, there is a whole document on choking risk. And so, the whole reason why we're doing this is to keep people safe from aspirating and choking on their foods and drinks. And it's based on what the current research was when the framework was developed. So it talks about where the risk lies and why the framework has the definitions that it has and why we define it. I also want to show you this. This is probably what you're all very familiar with. This is what we base all of our decisions on in terms of how we characterize a food at which level. And this is really the foundation of what you should be very familiar with. There's a lot out there in terms of support. I know we've even done webinars with General Mills on these particular levels, but all of this can be found on IDDSI.org. All right. So no matter your role, you probably have been exposed to IDDSI and may even have a pretty good grasp on the framework, what we just looked at in these past few slides. But now you're faced with developing an IDDSI training program for your team. And I put this slide together, and the woman, Gigi, who helps me with my slide, she says, "Are you sure you want that slide to look like that?" And I said, "Yeah, because it's chaotic." And that's really where, you went through the whole effort of learning IDDSI, and now you've got to teach it to other people. And here's some pictures of when I was teaching it to other people, and it does get a little chaotic. And so I've been through it, and I've got some best practices that I have developed based on what I've learned, and I'm going to share that with you today so that hopefully your experience in training your teams is not as chaotic as mine has been. And I can boil it down for you. I've been able to identify 5 key components you need for an IDDSI training program. And I'm going to go through each one of these key components with you basically for the rest of our time together today. But I want to share with them with you now right off the bat so you can see where we're going. First of all, the training teaches IDDSI in a thorough, clear, and organized way. Tons of content. We got to get it organized for folks. And the training focuses only on what your team needs or only on what the group of people you're training needs. Does your administrator need to know everything that the rest of your team needs? What about activities, clinical, etc.? The training empowers multiple types of learners. We're dealing with adult learners, so we need to understand how to train an adult learner. The training fosters independent problem solving, gets you off the hook of having to be there for every single textured modified food or drink that goes out. And the training promotes a culture of safety. Okay, let's go through the first one. The training teaches IDDSI in a thorough, clear, and organized way. A training program that simply describes facts about IDDSI is not enough for your team of food service workers or whatever team you're training. It's essential that your training program goes beyond simply sharing information on each IDDSI level. You need a training program that will give your team a comprehensive structure for how to think about IDDSI. And introducing IDDSI will be a paradigm shift for your team and likely your entire organization. So that means everybody needs to be trained on IDDSI. That's kind of a new thing for us. And I might add a little side note on this is you need a champion. So if you can train people outside of your department, then you're going to have a way to have other people who believe in safety, quality, standardization. They're going to support you in this effort because it is a big effort. Okay. More to that, I'd like to say that a valuable training program, IDDSI training program, breaks down the extensive amount of IDDSI information available in an easy to understand curriculum. But simplicity shouldn't come at the expense of accuracy or comprehensiveness. And an IDDSI training program should give instruction that is both clear and complete. Because, we're not just training on one diet, as we call it in our kitchens. We're training on more than one IDDSI level, which is translated to more than one diet. So we really need to have a way to clearly identify these levels for folks. And so what I did was I identified really 3 aspects of each IDDSI level that folks need to understand. And that first one is we need to tell for each IDDSI level, who is that IDDSI level for and what type of chewing and swallowing problems those individuals have. So for example, somebody who needs pureed food has different needs than somebody who needs easy to chew food. And we need to kind of be able to, in a very basic way, make that distinction for the folks who are making the food or serving the food or dealing with IDDSI in every way. Otherwise, it's too confusing. It's too complex. They don't see it as several levels. They see it as one huge glob of information. We need to make that distinction. Hey, different folks are going to need different aspects of IDDSI. IDDSI doesn't apply to every person. I think that helps clarify things for folks. And we need to then, for each level, say, how does IDDSI define the characteristic of each level? For example, minced and moist particle sizes are different than the soft and bite size. And we have a way to teach people and show people using the testing what those distinctions are. And then thirdly, we need to give folks details on how to do the testing methods. And, and as I keep saying, to me, that's where the proof is in the pudding, that we're able to show folks and teach them how to understand these levels by actually putting forks and spoons in their hands and showing them how the food is different. Okay. So now the second aspect, second key factor you need for a good training program is that the training has to focus only on what your team needs, because already your head's probably spinning a little bit about, well, this is a lot of information to teach people what they need to know. And so it has to be relevant to the day-to-day duties of those people. So maybe the person who's making the pureed food isn't necessarily the person who makes the thickened drinks. Maybe your clinical team needs to know how to make thickened drinks, but they don't need to know every aspect of pureed foods, but they need to know how to identify if, when it's not a good pureed food through testing. So again, tailor your training to what individuals need. And it should only include the knowledge and skill they need for their daily work. But, and here's the important part, they need to understand the why. And sometimes we skip that point. So that's going to be an important aspect of the training. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So when I say start with the why, to me, the biggest why with IDDSI is safety. Are we able to prevent choking hazards? And when you look at what's out there in the reported citations and the amount of choking that does happen around textured modified foods, it's amazing. And so we really have an opportunity here to prevent a lot of choking and aspiration, which of course is the breathing in of small particles into the lungs. So we've got the choking risk to consider from a safety, but sometimes we forget about the reduced malnutrition risk too. People who can't chew and swallow their foods or don't get food and drink in a form that's easy for them to chew and swallow are not going to eat well, and they're going to become malnourished. And of course, that's going to increase their risk of hospitalization. So that's part of the why. And then, of course, always we talk about nutrition, quality, dining experience, and quality of life. And let me give you an example of some of this training in terms of what I use. Dysphagia is kind of a weird word, and people aren't comfortable with it, but folks need to understand that people who have dysphagia have an increased risk of aspiration, breathing in foods, particles, and drink particles, and choking. So what that means is people with chewing and swallowing problems can choke. Everybody in our organization can understand. It's a very simple concept, and we can show them graphics as simple as this. Oops, sorry about that. We can show them graphics as simple as this that demonstrate food gets stuck in the throat. You can keep it that simple. I think that makes it a lot easier to make that connection. So there's a difference between somebody who doesn't like fish getting fish, and gee, that's disappointing, and that's a quality of life issue, and maybe that's a service issue that we all have to work on in our dining departments. That's a lot different than somebody who is on pureed food getting a cucumber salad. And that's a safety issue. And so if we can make that connection for folks, that really makes a difference in our training. And people respond to that. Okay, here's the other safety issue I talked about. This is malnutrition. This is a whole topic. I love this graphic. You can find this on Defeat Malnutrition Today, their website. This is things we all know because we deal with older adults and malnutrition, their nutritional status every day. I just want to point this out from the slide. Malnutrition is highest in older adults. What's the typical person that we serve? 85-year-old, right? Female and frail. And this is an interesting statistic that this is the number of malnutrition-related hospital stays per 100,000 folks. And I think this is really interesting. You would expect the number to be high compared to middle-aged or younger adults, but it's more than double that of those in the 65 to 84-year-old range. So we have a fair amount of malnutrition even in the over 65 population, but it really escalates after 85-year-old. And that's a category of folks that we're dealing with. So malnutrition is a real issue for us and a real concern. Anytime we get in the way of folks eating well, which is what dysphagia does, we need to mitigate that through appropriate textures of their food and drink. That's why we're all here. And I think the people on our teams can understand that. And when we share that with them, it helps elevate the importance of what we're doing with IDDSI. And then here's this. Many of you have seen this slide that I created before, just that it demonstrates what our role is that anywhere along the line in this continuum of concern that we have about eating, anywhere along this line that we can intervene, where people who eat poorly, they lose weight, they get nutritional deficiencies, they're thus increased risk for illness and infection, more likely to be frail, more likely to go to the hospital and stay longer, more likely to die, but if they survive it, they're going to come back to us with decreased functioning and more likely to fall. So this all ties into this. You know, I have another graphic that's similar to this that talks about the whole dysphagia cycle. And we need to intervene anywhere. So our folks can understand these. These are simple messages. This especially, our whole priority is we don't want people to lose weight. We want to give them nutrient-dense foods in a format that they can chew and swallow, or they can consume if they can't chew. And our priorities are the macronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and the phytochemicals. So that puts us all on the same page. So now we can talk about what are these key points to teach. These first three ones I already told you who's at IDDSI level 4, what type of chewing and problems, swallowing problems they might have, how IDDSI defines that level, details on which IDDSI methods are used for that. But I also add, we need to tell people how we define dysphagia. What does that mean? Chewing and swallowing problems, and what the risks are. Choking, malnutrition, hospitalization, poor quality of life. This, in a nutshell, is what we need to teach folks. What's IDDSI, each IDDSI level is for each person, how we define each one of those levels, how we test for those levels, and why it matters. And the why is, safety. All right. Oh, and quality, of course. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. I mentioned that, it's one thing to get, if you don't like fish and you get fish, it's another thing if you're supposed to be on pureed meat and you get a hamburger patty. And here's an example of a citation. I believe this was in Florida. Let me check. Hold on a second. I got to advance my slides. I've got this double system I'm using here. Oh, yes, this was in Crestview, Florida. They were cited FTAG 0802, provide sufficient support personnel to safely and effectively carry out the functions of food and nutrition services. It's interesting, to be cited on safety is really interesting. So here's a direct quote from the surveyor citation. The facility failed to ensure sufficient food and nutrition service support staff that had the appropriate competencies and skill set to accurately prepare, plate, serve modified consistency diet for 2 of the 5 residents. So what they're saying is that they the serving staff did not have, or the kitchen staff did not have the appropriate competencies and skill, and that the failure resulted in a choking incident on May 6, 2023, when the resident was served an intact meat patty instead of a ground or pureed meat patty that she was ordered to receive. So I'm sure if you went back to that kitchen staff and you said to them, did you know that this person, made a connection with them about who they were serving that patty to, they wouldn't have intentionally done that. And so it has to become part of our culture that the folks in our kitchen and the folks serving foods understand the safety connection between the food, between how they're preparing the food and the outcome for that individual eating the food. So, and the surveyors are looking at this, so we need to stay on top of that. Okay, so those are the first 2 things we have to think about for to develop a good IDDSI training program. The third is that the training empowers multiple types of learners. So it's vital that the training empowers multiple types of learners, and that includes things like non-native English speakers. So if there's anything in writing, is it something written in a word that's easy for people who English is not their first language, or for folks with low literacy levels? It's also important that topics should be reinforced throughout your training. So the same types of concepts like Dysphagia, chewing, swallowing problems, using the word dysphagia with the definition chewing and swallowing problems consistently so people start making that connection. Things like testing. And testing is whose responsibility is testing? When do we test? Some of those consistent messages can go throughout the program and you can repeat things. Adult learners like to have things repeated. That's how they learn things. The visual representation of IDDSI standards for each level. Posters, signs, pictures, setting up a pre-plate before the meal so people can see what exactly we're talking about as the standard. So a visual representation is important. And of course, hands-on experience. There's a certain amount of IDDSI that we just have to teach people and have them understand, but a good part of it can be learned, and I'll show you some examples of this, just by putting your hands on the food. Okay, here's a little sideline on how to engage adult learners. It has to be relevant to them. And of course, for our folks, it will be because this is food that they're dealing with every day and people they're serving every day. But we need to understand how your team, you need to understand how your team prefers to learn. Do they need things in writing so that they can think about it, take it home, study it, look at it? Do they need a visual understanding of what you want them to do? Do we need to actually have it explained to them orally? Or do they prefer discussion, which I think most people do? And I think probably what most of you have been thinking right now is, well, yeah, all of the above. There's some of us have more preference one over the other, but it's very important that we provide all of these. And of course, collaborative learning. And I'll tell you, and I'll give you a few examples of this. I'm amazed at what happens when you get a group of people who are used to having their hands on food all the time, our folks in our kitchens, get them together to talk about IDDSI, what comes up. Because people who are used to handling food all day, they can really absorb the IDDSI concepts pretty quickly. And then they come up with some of their own best practices. And then, of course, exploration. And I'm going to show an example of that. This is part of the hard part that people are having with IDDSI, is it's new to all of us. And so we're expecting it to be something like, teaching somebody about carbohydrate exchanging or, just serving a consistent carbohydrate diet. It's pretty straightforward. But with IDDSI, there's so many foods and food is so variable and it varies from time to time that you make it based on your ingredients and the condition of your ingredients. It does require some exploration so that there's a certain amount of feel you get once you use the IDDSI testing around how food will turn out and what you can anticipate. And you kind of develop your best practices as you go, but you have to just get started with it. And I'll show you a few examples of that as we move forward. And of course, that's one of the ways that you get immediate feedback. Okay. Here's another citation example. I think people find these helpful just to see kind of what's out there and what's the frame of mind of the surveyors. And I try to find fairly recent ones. Okay, so this is from Forest City, Iowa. Move this forward. This citation was 0805, FTAG 0805. Ensure that a nursing home area is free from accident hazards and provides adequate supervision to prevent accidents. I was so surprised. I've seen a lot of textured modified food citations revolving around this 0805 and accidents. So the citation quotation includes the facility had all residents evaluated by a speech therapist for the IDDSI framework of diets in April and May of 2023. Resident diets were changed and ordered per the ST's recommendations. Okay, they've started IDDSI implementation. Now, how many of you who said you started IDDSI implementation are in this position? Now let's see what happens. But the dietary manager stated that they're not following the diets as she was told to follow the mechanical soft diet model, which is a more liberal diet that includes bread. And then, of course, what happened was the resident was supposed to be given pureed pears and was given sliced pears, and documentation revealed that she had a choking incident. So what happened here is that they got started and then they were like, wait, this bread isn't working. People don't like the bread, not being able to get bread. Now we got pureed bread all around. We need to backpedal and we're not going to do this. And so this isn't directly necessarily a training issue as much as it's a diet order issue. I think what could have helped here is if some of their folks were evaluated to be on perhaps something like easy to chew with minced and moist meat. Don't forget, you can't change the framework, but you can take pieces of the framework that work for individuals. But once it's implemented, we need to understand that we have to have a fully implemented, and part of that full implementation involves a full-on IDDSI training program. All right, so I've got another question for you. How would you be in that situation? Here's your second polling question. How confident are you that your purees are consistently prepared safely? 1, you're not confident at all. 2, maybe, but you're not sure how safety is even defined. 3, when I check, they're sometimes safe. 4, when I check, they're always safe. 5, I'm completely confident and my team knows how to verify safety. So put in the Q&A 1 through 5, and Jenny will give us a sense of what kind of responses we're getting.
All right, Maggie, we have a couple 3s, some 5s, a 4. We do have a 1, and I'll let you know if any more come in.
Okay. And that's what I was suspecting we were going to get. And of course, the whole point of this question is we need to get to the point where I'm completely confident that my team knows how to verify safety. And could you have said that before IDDSI? Because how do you know in an objective way to teach them to verify safety? That's what I love about the testing. Anything else, Jenny?
Let's see, some 4s, a 3. So kind of hovering around that 4 or 5 midpoint for the most part.
Great. All right. I'm gonna give you I'm going to go ahead and move forward and give you my last 2 points of the 5, and that is number 4 is the training fosters independent problem solving. That's the whole idea. It gets us off the hook of having to be super responsible for every aspect of IDDSI 24/7 for every food that ever goes out of your kitchen. So the problem fosters independent problem solving. You should feel confident that your foods are prepared using the IDDSI testing methods and that your team can do that on their own. And the best IDDSI training programs will enable your team to solve problems independently. It's as simple as using a fork, a spoon, and your observation skills. And I'll show you what I mean. Okay, here's some yogurt. This is regular Yoplait yogurt that does not have any particles in it. And you can start by just taking any food. This is just an example of a study that I was doing on the yogurts. And you can see I'm tilting the plate there on the left. This is, by the way, falls under that exploration category of learning. So you tilt the food, no separate thin liquids. Okay, that's a test of an appearance test for pureed level 4. Great. Look at my fork drip test in the middle. Beautiful. Little tail there. Very nice. And the spoon tilt test, little bit of a film, but now I see I've had success. And even just starting there with your teams is a great way to demonstrate the testing and demonstrate success. Here's some more. I have that strainer out to demonstrate that if you can see the slide in the middle, it has those particles of fruit in the yogurt. That's a different type of yogurt than the first one. I literally used a strainer and water, and I poured the water over the yogurt and ended up with those particles, and that's how I was able to find those particles. And then I can say, well, how's the particle size? Are they soft enough? Which, by the way, they weren't. So even though they may have met, for example, soft and bite-sized particle size, they weren't soft enough. And so it didn't meet IDDSI level 6 or 5 for that matter, because the particle sizes were too big. But if you look on the far right there, that's a whipped yogurt product. And look how beautifully it comes off the spoon. And the one on the far left is the chocolate version that I ran through the strainer, and it, of course, didn't have any particle size in it at all. That's the type of exploration I'm talking about, and that helps people develop a sense of independence in using the testing methods. A lot of it's trial and error. All right, so your team should walk away from your IDDSI training program feeling confident to develop solutions to IDDSI challenges on the fly, from thickening purees that are too thin to making sure IDDSI minced and moist level 5 foods are the correct size. And I'll show you an example of that in a few pictures, but it's important that we go from the testing then to how to correct the foods. All right, here's another survey. And I believe this is Colorado. This is FTAG 0805. Ensure resident receives and the facility provides food prepared in a form designed to meet individual needs. Here's the survey quote. Oops, put that back till we get to this one. The facility failed to ensure that 7 of the 9 residents with a dysphagia diagnosis received food and fluids prepared in a form designed to meet their needs. Interviews with the dietary supervisor and the cook revealed that they lacked the necessary training to ensure the 7 residents were served a mechanical soft and thickened liquids as ordered. So this is for a community that wasn't even on IDDSI. The speech-language pathologist indicated that obstruction of the airway might occur if a dysphagia resident who cannot chew failed to receive a mechanical soft diet. So just to illustrate, we're seeing surveyors citing on, even no matter what method you are on, if the textured modified foods and thickened drinks are not served appropriately, it's a citation. Okay. So here's a suggestion for those of you who have not yet started implementing IDDSI or who have not yet started IDDSI training. This is something you can start tomorrow. You're going to start with purees, and because you're already serving purees, right? Everybody's already doing that. And this is regardless of whether you've adopted IDDSI, you can still do this because your diet orders are all the same. You've already got recipes for purees. You've already got the diet extensions on your menu. Your team's familiar with purees, so it's not that new. We're starting within our level of familiarity. It's clinically similar, puree to puree, as opposed to, I think that other community that got cited, they got in trouble because they made the direct connection between textured modified and minced and moist level 5. Then, they had people who were safely eating bread, and then they transferred them to, minced and moist without thinking, is there another way that we can serve these folks? They don't need every single item minced, depending on what their individual needs were. So puree is beautiful that way. It's very clinically similar to what folks need. Okay, so what do? You start with, purees. You can train your team and talk about the benefits of IDDSI. Okay, so this is how we can begin to talk about and train folks tomorrow on IDDSI by just starting with purees. Say, okay, now our purees fit here on the IDDSI framework. It's green, it's PU4, and we can learn the colors and the names and the abbreviations. And they'll start being familiar with what the framework looks like. And there's your PU4. Then they can learn the testing method. And they'll gain confidence around IDDSI, and you can kind of get a buzz going. So you don't have to take on the training for everything all at once. You can start with your purees. So here you go. Step 1 is test where you are. Even if the tests are fails, these 2 happen to be passes. But even if the tests are fails, you learned something. They got the fork and the spoon in their hands, and they're working with the pureed foods. Here's a good example of how sometimes it doesn't work, and it didn't turn out. I worked with this one on the left. I worked with a group of chefs who they came prepared with food, which was interesting. And one of them was so proud because he came with this cake. And he says, I have the perfect pureed cake, PU4 cake. And we sliced it, and that's me holding a piece of it. Well, you may not know this, but on the IDDSI.org website, there are audit tools where you can actually use as check marks to test as you're testing foods. It shows you the characteristics that you need to meet in order for the food to test, as well as the testing methods. You know, spoon tilt is on PU4, fork drip test. And then they also say on the bottom, if a pureed food is so firm that you can pick it up, it doesn't qualify as a pureed food. Because think about it, you would need biting skills in order to eat that. So that is an example of a fail. But just because it was a fail doesn't mean it wasn't good, because it's a way for people to learn the testing techniques and the characteristics of the food. And then you can begin that conversation of each of us has a role. You know, we all have roles in keeping those we serve safe. So we start each getting some ownership around this. And we can practice the ideal, but learn what's not ideal. The picture on the right is something I made. All those food items passed, but that's a really ugly presentation. And so it still is not acceptable from a quality perspective. And I've got a few examples of some good ones I'll show you in a second. And so the whole idea of this is to foster independent decision making and independent skill set. So one, we're just testing where we are. We're not doing anything other than testing. From there, you can start training the team. You can tell them about what dysphagia. You can tell them about the pureed label, you know, the PU4, the color green. We can say that you need to know a spoon tilt test and the fork drip test, appearance, no separate thin liquids. It can't be too firm. So there it all is, you know, basically on one slide what the next step is. And then here you go. Here's the ideal appearance. This has too much separate thin liquid. This is not a pass. Fork drip, that's a beautiful pass. Spoon tilt, that's a beautiful pass. So there we are. Again, it's a great idea to have some kind of visual aid through a poster. The one in the foreground, you can get that from IDDSI.org and download it for free. Pre-meal testing, you know, even if you just right now, tomorrow said, you know, before we start serving the purees, let's test them. Get the basics of IDDSI down through that process, empower independence. Okay, then the third step, then you can start fixing things. Then you can say, well, is this really the way we want to do things? Can we research some fixes? You know, we're going to have trouble with, we know we're going to have trouble with our starches and our breads when it comes to purees. They tend to be stickier. Do we need to use thickener? Do we need to add liquids? Hey, how does this taste? How does it look? All right, this is what I ended up with. When I told you I met with a group of chefs, but I wouldn't even know if they were all trained chefs. They were food service managers, dining managers. And they came with prepared pureed foods, and I brought a ricer, and they had these piping bags. The picture on the left is pureed meat. They used kitchen bouquet, you know, like liquid smoke. That's how they got those brown lines on there. And to me, it wasn't even necessary. And spatulas, little spatulas to shape the food. The eggs you see there are pureed eggs. They just kind of arranged them on the plate. This is what I'm saying. If you train people whose hands are in foods all day, these are the types of things results you're gonna get. Okay, and then this is what they did with the ricer in the front. That's a commercially available pureed rice product, but they put it through the ricer. It's a pork chop on the right, pureed. Again, just used a spatula. And then the carrots in the back are using the wide piping bag. And you can get heat resistant piping bags that'll keep your pureed foods hot on the line. Okay, another polling question as we kind of wrap things up. Does your organization have a formal patient safety initiative? A, no, not in a formal way. B, yes, but clinical or nursing handles patient safety. C, yes, and dining has a formal role. A, B, or C, and put it in the Q&A.
All right, so we have two B's, an A, a C, another B, another C.
Okay, good. All right. That's helpful. And you can see where I'm going with this. You know, it's really the last point is we really need to promote a culture of safety. You know, a valuable IDDSI training program promotes a culture of safety. The best way is to develop a culture of safety among the group members. You know, we want to really make sure that people aren't just robots in terms of how they're preparing these foods, that there's an understanding of this is the way we do things in this organization. And this is one of the ways that we keep people safe. It's more effective than just presenting people with facts. And this is particularly true of IDDSI because the concepts are new and complex, and there's so much risk. So tying it in with safety, I think, helps people understand what their roles are. So in order for IDDSI to be successful, everyone on your team needs to understand what their role is. And you're simply not giving your team IDDSI information. You're fostering a culture of safety among your team and increasing the safety of those you care for. And so we can tie in, I think the secret to this is to tie into our organization's safety programs and safety culture. And by the way, this is the trick of how you get that buy-in. I get that question a lot from folks who say, you know, hey, I'm all in for IDDSI, but as you know, it's not a one man or one woman job. We really need the whole organization behind us. And this is one of the ways that you can get some support is through safety culture. You know, as opposed to safety programs that are just protocols, forms, and tools. Safety culture is how your group thinks and behaves, and being part of that group forms the behavior. This is how we do it here. And this is just a photo of even the World Health Organization has an initiative on patient safety. So patient safety is a big thing in your organization, probably is very supportive of that. And so we can borrow from other organizations and in creating a safety culture, we can connecting IDDSI to safety, recruiting someone on the clinical team who cares about safety. Who is the person? Many of you said letter B, which was, yeah, we have the safety program, but clinical is in charge of it. Find that clinical person because that person will help support you in your IDDSI implementation throughout your organization. Enlist a champion, perhaps an administrator, and I'm going to give you an example of that in one of our last slides, and borrow from other safety cultures because, you know, how many days since we've had an accident type stuff, signs, vocabulary, rewards, and consistency, that consistent message throughout and your entire organization supporting safety. So safety culture reflects an organization's entire value system. It's not something that we can do on our own. And let me show you this last example of a survey citation. This is FTAG 0692, provide enough food/fluids to maintain a resident's health. Okay, here we go. So resident 4 received a regular diet instead of the ordered mechanical soft diet, and the registered dietitian said she found the mechanical veggies to be cut a little big, and she would be re-educating what size needs to be for mechanical veggies. Then the administrator said, well, I personally had given the in-service on specific date on the topic of proper meals and service trays and proper diet. And then he verified that this in-service and auditing somehow, despite the in-servicing and auditing, somehow a tray got through, both the dietary tray line and the clinical staff passed the incorrect tray to the resident. So this is about a mechanically soft diet that got through, dietary, the person who made it, the person who checked it in dining, the person who served it, the person who checked it in clinical, the administrator had told people about it, the dietitian had told people about it. What if they just said, hey, look at this. If you take your fork and you put your fork next to the meat, and if the meat fits between the tines of the fork and it looks moist to you, feels moist, it's soft, that's a pass. If all of those people along that chain had this visual and had this understanding and made that connection that this is how we do things here in terms of safety and quality, don't you think that would make a big difference? And this is a very simple thing for people to be taught and for people to understand. But you have to do it, and your whole organization has to embrace it. Okay. So that's really the bottom line. It's about quality nutrition, quality dining experience, quality of life. We all agree on this. This is our common ground that we all stand on. And if we start here, this is really what's going to impact our IDDSI training. And this is how we have to think about, this is the thought process we have to start with for our IDDSI training. So let me summarize for you the 5 key components you need for an IDDSI training program. 1, the training teaches IDDSI in a thorough, clear, and organized way. The training focuses only on what your team needs, although different teams might need different information. The training empowers multiple types of learners, specifically adult learners. The training fosters independent problem solving. The training promotes a culture of safety. Okay, so those are my thoughts. I welcome you to connect with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to us at roachdietitians.com. And I'm going to hand it back to Jenny to see if we have any questions.
Fantastic, Maggie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Fantastic presentation. Really love the images. I think that was super helpful. We are going to go ahead and begin our Q&A session. So you may submit questions by clicking the Q&A icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And thus far, it looks like we have some coming in, Maggie, but we did get one already. So I'm going to go ahead and read that off, and maybe we can squeeze a few more in. This question was, are you seeing more collaboration between speech therapists and food and nutrition services?
Yes. Absolutely. I happen to be involved in the United States IDDSI Reference Group, which is an organization started by IDDSI Global to help with implementation of IDDSI in the US. And it's about, 49% dietitian and 49% speech pathologist and 2% other. And there's a wonderful collaboration going on higher levels, from an organizational perspective, and also just on a day-to-day basis. As don't forget the speech pathologists, we're going through the same thing that we have as dietitians and dining leaders have. And so as all of our information and knowledge raises, it's raising everybody else, and there's a ton of collaboration going on. And where you can see that happening is if you go to IDDSI.org to the USA page. There's a lot of content on there that was produced by both dietitians and speech pathologists. Good question.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you may have covered this, but we've gotten a lot of questions on ideation or ideas and where to find additional thought starters kind of on dysphagia and menuing. I'm assuming IDDSI, that website, but wanted to throw it over to you just in case for ideation.
Yeah, IDDSI.org has some great content. Always start there. There's some IDDSI 101s, actual PowerPoint presentations that were recorded that are brief that talk about, the basics of IDDSI. There's also some frequently asked questions there and best practices. There are some, how to talk to administrators about IDDSI. So there's a lot of really great info. And then go into, if you're looking about specifics about like foods and things like that, the frequently asked questions is a good place. And then I also invite you to visit our website at roachdietitians.com. We've got over 30 blog posts on IDDSI. And we have what we call the ultimate guide, which explains IDDSI at each level. And we have a few examples of food standards as well.
Fantastic. Oh, we're really getting the questions now, so we'll have to fly through some of these. I'm excited. Keep them coming, folks. Can you explain more on the test you used for pureed bread items so it is not too thick?
Oh, I'll tell you, I think what they're asking is how did I get it to pass, and how I got it to pass. And believe me, I've worked so hard over this, and I actually collaborated with the chef dietitian, Sarah Haas. Some of you may know. What we did is we start with frozen bread, whole grain bread, and I'm going to talk fast so we can get it all in. Whole grain bread is better than regular white bread. start with it frozen, grind it up first, either super fine for pureed or kind of fine for minced and moist. Use a thickened milk with oil in it, and we had skim milk powder as well, but you thicken it to about moderately thick, fold it in, you're good to go. If you're looking for the recipe, it's Thicket. Thicket has that recipe on their site because we developed the recipe using Thicket.
Fantastic. What about, is there a no mixed consistency diet? Our speech therapist frequently puts this comment on the diet order.
You'll find that information on the framework at IDDSI.org, and what it means for every level, an individual may or may not be able to have mixed consistency foods. An example of mixed consistency food is soup with small vegetables in it, or watermelon. It breaks apart to more than one consistency in your mouth as you're eating it. So you might be trying to manipulate the food in your mouth, and then all that water or juice, soup, broth is going down your throat, and that gets too complicated. So you can find more about that in the framework document on IDDSI.org. And I got a little bit on that on my website as well.
Perfect. How about my hospital kitchen uses Meal IQ software to generate meals. We serve yogurt on a FLD. Is this permitted?
And what do they serve it on?
FLD? I'm not quite sure.
Oh, full liquid diet. Full liquid diet.
Oh, okay.
If there are no chunks or particles in it, yes. But it depends on what your diet manual says. So look in your diet manual. So you can't say, oh yeah, we've served it because Maggie Roche on a General Mills webinar said you could. You got to make sure that's in your diet manual, and you evaluate that for your, because it depends on the yogurt, as you probably know. If you take Greek yogurt, it might separate. So it depends. By the way, General Mills has a great document on all their yogurts and what IDDSI level it lands on.
Yeah, we sure do. Let's do one more question and then we'll do closing. And folks,
Okay.
Yes, you will receive these slides in the coming days. Last question is, maybe what are your top 3 tips, Maggie, on creating the training for staff?
My top 3 tips are: incorporate the why, so that you make sure that you have the why. Repeat important topics, repeat important messages so that they understand it, and it must have a hands-on component, hands-on training. And we've got some training on our site if folks are, don't want to figure this out on their own. We've already developed some tools on that.
Fantastic, Maggie. We so appreciate your time today.
Good. Thanks, everybody.
Really appreciate it. It's fantastic. Really well received. And we are almost at time. So I'm going to go ahead and start and close us out, folks. We do appreciate all your time and effort today. You will be receiving an email in the coming days that will include links to these slides, as well as the CEU credit. So please do be sure to check your spam folder. Sometimes that's an issue for folks. Additionally, please make sure to visit generalmillsfoodservice.com for information on rebates, helpful marketing tools, videos, and new item launches, as well as that piece on yogurt at General Mills that Maggie referenced. And then finally, don't forget to connect with us and the Bell Institute of Health on our websites and socials. This will conclude today's program. You may now disconnect. Thank you so much for joining us today.